إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد. باب في زكاة الفطر. Sheikh Salih Fawzan al-Fawzan, his book al-Mulakhas al-Fiqhi, he says the chapter as regards the Zakat al-Fitr. Zakat al-Fitri min Ramadan al-Mubarak tusamma bidhalik لأن الفطر سببها فإضافتها إليه من إضافة الشيء إلى سببه. He says Zakat al-Fitr is paid at the end of the blessed month of Ramadan. It is called Zakat al-Fitr because the reason for the payment of it is the fitr itself, meaning the breaking of the fast at the end of the month. فَإِضَافَتُهَا إِلَيْهِ مِنْ إِضَافَةِ الشَّيْءِ إِلَى سَبَبِهِ. So it is attributed or ascribed to fitr because it is the reason for it. It is the reason why it is paid, because of the conclusion of the month having arrived. وَالدَّلِيلُ عَلَى وُجُوبِهَا الْكِتَابُ وَالسُنَّةُ وَالْإِجْمَاعُ. The evidence that it is mandatory is the Quran and the Sunnah and the agreement of the early scholars. قال الله تعالى, from the Quran, Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, He said, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى. Some of the Salaf, they said that what is meant by it is التزكي هنا إخراج زكاة الفطر, is paying زكاة الفطر. وتدخل في عموم قوله تعالى وآتوا الزكاة. Likewise, it is included in the statement of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala when He described the believers, saying that they are those who pay the zakat. They are those who pay the zakat. This is a statement of some of the Salaf, and it is from more of the bab of al-ima wal-ishara, something that could be understood from the verse قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى. Say the fast for tartib. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى. The person who purifies himself is successful. وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى. And then he makes dhikr of the name of Allah, like you do on the Eid. Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, wa lillahi alhamd. فَصَلَّى. And then he makes salat. So this is the order. Right? You have the tazakki, which is what some of the Salaf, they said, is payment of Zakat al-Fitr. Then you have after that, the dhikr, right? And then after that you have the salah. So it could be understood from the verse. There are around 20 surah of the Quran that were revealed in Medina. Around 20 surah of the Quran that were revealed in Medina. And Surah Al-A'la is not one of them. This is in Surah Al-A'la, which was revealed in Mecca before the obligation of fasting, before the obligation of paying Zakat al-Fitr, and so on and so forth. However, some of the Salaf, they understood that these verses apply to that situation, and so they're used as an evidence, and Allah knows best. وَفِي الصَّحِيحَيْنِ وَغَيْرِهِمَا. And in the two authentic collections and other than them, فَرَضَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَى اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ زَكَاةَ الْفِطْرِ صَاعًا مِنْ تَمْرٍ أَوْ صَاعًا مِنْ شَعِيرٍ على العبد والحر والذكر والأنثى والصغير والكبير من المسلمين. Likewise, in the hadith of Abdullah bin Umar, collected by Bukhari and Muslim, Prophet ﷺ obligated Zakat al-Fitr, sa'an min tamar or sa'an min sha'ir, to be paid as a sa'a of tamr or a sa'a of sha'ir. Ala al-abdi wal-hurr. It is paid on behalf of the slave and the free man. Have to pay the Zakat al-Fitr. The slave has to pay Zakat al-Fitr. Somebody sent me a text earlier. He said there's a person in the halfway house or on work release have to pay Zakat al-Fitr if they have the ability to. The slave has to pay Zakat al-Fitr. And the free person has to pay Zakat al-Fitr. So even the captive, they have the ability, or the prisoner, if they have the ability to pay the Zakat al-Fitr, then they have to pay it. وَذَكَرِ وَالْأُنْثَى. The male and the female. وَالصَّغِيرِ وَالْكَبِيرِ. And the young and the old, the children and the elders. مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. From the Muslims. So in short, anyone who is Muslim, Zakat al-Fitr has to be paid on their behalf. They have to pay the Zakat al-Fitr if they have the ability. And if they don't have the ability, then the person يَجِبُ عَلَيْهِ نَفَقَتُهُ. That it is mandatory to take care of them, has to pay it on their behalf. The person who has to take care of them has to pay it on their behalf. Like the parent is paying the Zakat al-Fitr on behalf of the child, or the husband on behalf of his wife. The likes of these things. وَقَدْ حَكَى غَيْرُ وَاحِدٍ مِنَ الْعُلَمَاءِ إِجْمَعِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ عَلَى وُجُوبِهَا. And more than one scholar in the past has mentioned the consensus of the scholars of the Muslims that it is mandatory. وَالْحِكْمَةُ فِي مَشْرُوعِيَّتِهَا أنها تحرة للصائم من اللغو والرفث وطعمة للمساكين والشكر لله تعالى على إتمام فريضة الصيام. The wisdom for it being legislated for us is that it purifies the person who was fasting from that which was laghu and rafath, as comes in the statement of Abu Hurairah. He said that al-laghu and al-rafath, that harmful speech or useless speech, vain talk, and al-rafath and argumentation, disputation, and the likes of these things, that they يَخْرِقُ ثَوْبَ الصِّيَامِ, that they tear the garment, the fabric of the fast. They tear holes in the garment of the fasting, the fabric of the fasting. And paying the Zakat al-Fitr is like mending the tears in the garment of the fasting, and the fabric of the fasting. And so they are tuhra, they purify the fasting person from any speaking about things that didn't benefit him, or arguing and bickering and those sorts of things while he or she was fasting. وَتُعْمَةٌ لِلْمَسَاكِينَ, and in order to feed the poor. وَشُكْرٌ لِلَّهِ تَعَالَى عَلَى إِتْمَامِ فَرِيضَةُ الصِّيَامِ, and out of gratitude to Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala for having completed the obligation of fasting. وَتَجِبُ زَكَاةُ الْفِطْرِ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ ذَكَرًا كَانَ أَوْ أُنْثَى. And so it is mandatory, the Shaykh says, that Zakat al-Fitr be paid on behalf of every Muslim, whether male or female, صَغِيرًا أَوْ كَبِيرًا, whether young or old, حُرًّا كَانَ أَوْ عَبْدًا, whether they are a free man or a captive. لحديث ابن عمر الذي ذكرنا قريبا, due to the hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar that was just mentioned. ففيه أن الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم ذكر زكاة الفطر على هؤلاء. And in it was the fact that, as we heard, the Prophet ﷺ obligated zakat al-fitr upon all of these categories of people. وَفَرَضَ بِمَعْنَى أَلْزَمَ وَأَوْجَبَ. What is meant by farada is alzam, and he made it binding, وَأَوْجَبَ, and he made it compulsory. وكما أن في الحديث أيضا بيان مقدار ما يخرج عن كل شخص وجنس ما يخرج. He said, likewise we find in the hadith a clarification and explanation of the amount that each person must pay and render for their self from the Zakat al-Fitr, and likewise jinsu ma yukhraj, the type of thing that must be given in a food in the or at the end of Ramadan for the Zakat al-Fitr, wa huwa arba'atu amdad, which is 4 mud, which is a sa'a. A sa'a is 4 mud, 4 amdad. وجنس ما يخرج هو ما هو من غالب قوت البلد برا كان أو شعيرا أو تمرا أو زبيبا أو أقيطا أو غير هذه الأصناف مما اعتاد الناس أكله في البلد. He said the type of food that is given for Zakat al-Fitr is the staple food of the land. And what is meant by staple food are things that are generally imperishable, things that have not been cooked and do not require refrigeration. Things that have not been cooked and they do not require refrigeration, like rice or grains, oatmeal, couscous, sugar, flour. These sorts of things can be given as Zakat al-Fitr. They can be given as Zakat al-Fitr. Also, dried beans can be given as Zakat al-Fitr. Dates, raisins. Now he says here barley. And other than that, I don't think anybody would eat barley. As the Shaykh Muhammad bin Hadi, he said how the Prophet ﷺ used to eat bread that was made out of barley, that didn't have leavening in it, meaning it didn't have shortening in it. It was hard, almost like the texture of a cracker. It was very hard. It wasn't like soft bread like we eat. He said if you was to try to feed that to an animal today, they wouldn't eat it. Right? So if you show up at somebody's house with a bag full of barley, they're not going to know what to do with it, because it's not the staple food of the people of the land. Some of the scholars even mention that meat can be given as Zakat al-Fitr, where it is qutul balad, where it is what the people eat more than anything else. And that doesn't apply to us, as ravenous and carnivorous as American people are for meat. What is meant by that are, like, for example, the Inuit people. They say Eskimo is a slur. Don't say Eskimo, you might offend somebody. The Inuit people in the North Pole, right? And people who live in colder climates, they eat a lot of meat. They eat more meat than they eat grains and those sorts of things. So for people in those sorts of climates and those sorts of lands where the vast majority of what they eat is meat, right? I certainly hope they exercise a lot, right? But if that is the case, then that can be given. Some people, they heard over the years that fish or chicken or different things could be given in certain environments or certain lands. And so they said, well, who eats more meat than American people? Qiyasan, they started to, some of them may have given Zakat al-Fitr, chicken wings. And people in America eat a lot of chicken, right? Don't give your Zakat al-Fitr as chicken, right? Because it's not the staple food of the people of the land. He said that which the people eat as staple food in the land, وَغَلَبَ اسْتِعْمَالُهُمْ لَهُ كالأرز وضر وما يقتاته الناس في كل بلد بحسبه. He said like rice and other types of grains and that which is a staple food of the land according to the land that you are in. كما بين صلى الله عليه وسلم وقت إخراجها وأنه أمر بها أن تؤدى قبل صلاة العيد. So he explained he explained what type of food to give. He explained the time that it is to be given, which is that it is to be given before the Salatul Eid. فيبدأ وقت الإخراج الأفضل بغروب الشمس ليلة العيد. And so the best time to give it is from the setting of the sun on the night of the Eid, meaning the last night after the moon is sighted, so on and so forth, which is the night before the Salatul Eid. It's called the night of the Eid. ويجوز تقديم إخراجها قبل العيد بيوم أو يومين. And it's permissible to give it a day or two before the Eid. A day or two before the Eid. As is mentioned by Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, أن الصحابة كانوا يعطون قبل الفطر بيوم أو يومين فكان إجماعا منهم. That the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to pay the Zakat al-Fitr a day or two before. And this is like a consensus and agreement of the Sahaba. فإخراجها يوم العيد قبل الصلاة أفضل. To give it on the day of the Eid before the Salat is better. فإن فاته هذا الوقت فأخر إخراجها عن صلاة العيد وجب عليه إخراجها قضاء. If a person for some reason missed the opportunity to do so and delayed paying it until the Salatul Eid, then he must give it as qada. He must give it as qada, and to make up for what he missed. For the due to the hadith of Ibn Abbas, "Man addaha qabla salat, fahiya zakatun maqbula." Whoever pays it before these salat, then it is a zakat that is accepted. وَمَنْ أَدَّاهَا بَعْدَ الصَّلَاةِ فَهِيَ صَدَقَةٌ مِنَ الصَّدَقَاتِ. And whoever gives it after the salat, then it is a sadaqah from the sadaqat. It is from the general acts of charity, but it is still mandatory. يكون آثما بتأخير إخراجها عن الوقت المحدد لمخالفته أمر الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم. And in this case, the person will be sinful for having delayed paying it past the time of the salat, and the time that was the limitation, because they had opposed the order of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. ويخرج المسلم زكاة الفطر عن نفسه وعمن يمونهم. So the Muslim, he is to pay the zakat al-fitr for himself, on behalf of himself, and on behalf of those that he spends upon. من الزوجات والأقارب, from his spouses and from his relatives. Due to the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Addu al-fitrata amman tamunun." Pay the zakat al-fitr on behalf of those that you support. On behalf of those that you support. So if a person is supporting a family member, they don't have the ability to pay the zakat al-fitr, to buy it and to give it themselves, then the obligation falls upon them. وَيُسْتَحَبُّ إِخْرَاجُهَا عَنَ الْحَمْلِ لِفِعْلِ عُثْمَانِ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُ. And it is recommended to pay the zakat al-fitr on behalf of the fetus, and the fetus in the womb of the mother, as the unborn child, due to the hadith of, or due to the action rather, of Uthman radiyallahu anhu wa ardahu. وَمَنْ لَزِمَ غَيْرَهُ إِخْرَاجُ الْفِطْرَةِ عَنْهُ فَأَخْرَجَهُ عَنْ نَفْسِهِ بِدُونِ إِذْنٍ مَنْ تَلْزَمُهُ أَجْزَأَتْ لِأَنَّهَا وَجَبَتْ عَلَيْهِ ابْتِدَاءً وَالْغَيْرُ مُتَحَمِّلٌ لَهَا غَيْرُ أَصِيلٌ فَإِنْ أَخْرَجَ شَخْصٌ عَنْ شَخْصٍ لَا تَلْزَمُهُ نَفَقَتُهُ بِإِذْنِهِ أَجْزَأَتْ وَبِدُونِ إِذْنِهِ لَا تَجْزِئُ. He said, whoever من لزم غيره إخراج الفطر عنه, and if a person من لزم غيره إخراج الفطرة عنه فأخرجه عن نفسه بدون إذن من تلزمه أجزأت لأنها وجبت عليه ابتداء والغير متحمل لها غير أصيل من أخرج شخص عن شخص لا تلزمه نفقته بإذنه أجزأت وبدون إذنه لا تجزي. So if a person is responsible for somebody else, and they paid the zakat al-fitr without their permission. Say, for example, your wife said, I want to pay my zakat al-fitr on my own. But in general, the husband is responsible for spending upon the wife and upon the children. In that situation, because they were somebody who is responsible for spending upon that person, then it counts on their behalf. But if I was to say, Akhi, Shah, I done paid your zakat al-fitr, don't worry about it, without your permission, it doesn't count, because I didn't have your permission. It doesn't count because I didn't have your permission. He said, وَلِمَنْ وَجَبَ عَلَيْهِ إِخْرَاجُ الْفِطْرَةِ عَنْ غَيْرِهِ أَنْ يُخْرِجَ فِطْرَةَ ذَلِكَ الْغَيْرِ مَعَ فِطْرَتِهِ فِي الْمَكَانِ الَّذِي هُوَ فِيهِ. He said, likewise, وَلَوْ كَانَ الْمُخْرَجُ عَنْهُ فِي مَكَانٍ آخَرٍ. So likewise, a person should pay the zakat al-fitr if he is paying on behalf of somebody else in the place that he is in, even if that person is somewhere else. So if the person is in another state, if the person is, for example, in the last 10 nights of Ramadan, he's in the Haram, and he's going to be making the Eid in Mecca. and he has to pay Zakat al-Fitr on behalf of his wife and his children, so on and so forth, then those that he pays Zakat al-Fitr on behalf of, he pays the Zakat al-Fitr, he gives the Zakat al-Fitr in the place that he is in, even if they are in another place. And this is something that is recommended, to give it in the place that you are in. وَنُحِبُّ أن ننقل لك كلاما لابن القيم رحمه الله تعالى ونحب أن ننقل لك كلاما لابن القيم رحمه الله تعالى في جنس المخرج في زكاة الفطر. He said, and I would like to convey to you the words of Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala as regards what is paid in Zakat al-Fitr. He said rahimahullah ta'ala, لما ذكر الأنواع الخمسة الواردة في الحديث, after mentioning the 5 types of foods that are mentioned in the hadith, وهذه كانت غالب أقواته بالمدينة. He said that what the Prophet ﷺ mentioned here is what was the staple food that was most prevalent in Medina. فأما أهل بلد أو محلة قوتهم غير ذلك فإنما عليهم صاع من قوتهم. As for the people who live in a land, that the staple food of that land is other than that, then the sa'a that is given, which is 4 amdad, and 4 mud, which is roughly on the safe side between 5 and 7 pounds, depending on what you are giving, because it is what? And it is kayl as opposed to wazn. And it's not something that is weighed, that is measured according to weight. It is something that is according to measure, according to the amount of it. And so we kind of have to guesstimate, unless you have a sa'a, or unless you use the exact measurement, you have something to apportion it. And if you go on Bekka.net, our brother Musa Richardson, may Allah bless him, he has a very informative article about the sa'a and nabawi, and what is the sa'a that was used in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the exact amount of it. In general, if you look, it fluctuates between 5 and 7 pounds. So if a person gives around 7 pounds of something, I need to be on the safe side per person, then they have done what is upon them. He said, فإن كان قوتهم من غير الحبوب كاللبن واللحم والسمك أخرجوا فطرتهم من قوتهم كائنا ما كان. He said, for example, if the majority of what they eat in that land was not hubub, and it was not grains and rice and the likes of these things, but it was milk and meat and fish, then it is given according to what is the vast majority of what they eat. So here, for example, we have flour, we have other things, oatmeal, different things that people eat, sugar, and the things that people use that are permissible to be given as Zakat al-Fitr. وهذا قول جمهور العلماء وهو الصواب الذي لا يقال بغيره. He said, and this is the statement of the vast majority of the scholars, and it is that which is correct, and other than it is not resorted to. إذا المقصود سد خلة المساكين يوم العيد ومواساتهم من جنس ما يقتات أهل بلدهم. He said, as much as that the intention is to fulfill the need of the poor on the day of Eid, ومواساتهم, and he had to show compassion and sympathy towards them with giving them what is the staple food of the land that they eat. وعلى هذا فيجزئ الدقيق وإن لم صح فيه الحديث. وأما إخراج الخبز أو الطعام فإنه إن كان أنفع للمساكين لقلة المعونة والكلفة فيه فقد كان الحب أنفع لهم لطول بقائه. He said, and so any type of grain in general can be given, and flour can be given. He said, as for giving them things that are already cooked, giving them food that is already cooked, and giving them bread and the likes of these things, even though they may be beneficial immediately, and because it doesn't require them to cook it and grind it and these sorts of things, then things that are grains are more beneficial because they last for longer, they are imperishable. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.